Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Mikey, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. As we wait for more people to join, tell us why you're here today and how you feel as an emoji in the chat box on your right. It'll be also interesting to find out where our audience is from. So why don't you share where you're located in right now in the chat box? Hello, everyone. Good morning. Morning. We're just going to wait until maybe 2 more minutes just for more people to join. But we do already have a lot of people on this call. Wow, we have someone from Vietnam. Hello, Lynn. Who here is from Indonesia or Singapore as well? I know we have a lot of Malaysians. Wow. Hi, Patricia from Singapore. Morning. Do share emojis as well. It's a nice way to express yourself. Hello. There you go, Forrest. Thank you for the emoji. Nice laughing face. You seem to be interested, Roshan. I'm from Malaysia, but the accent sounds like I'm from the UK because I grew up there, but I am Malaysian. Hello. Great. Just 1 more minute. Salam. Welcome. Okay. I think it's a good time to start now. So today, I'm honored to be joined by Naluri mental health coach, Sharifah, to present Mindful Connections, Navigating Relationships for Emotional and Mental Wellness. But just before we start, apologies, let's get to the housekeeping. So throughout the presentation, we do encourage you to be asking questions, to participate in any interactive elements, and also share your thoughts in general of the presentation. If you'd like to message me directly or Diana directly, type in our names with the @ and then if you want to remain anonymous, there's an option to send it as a private message. There will be handouts throughout the session. You can find that on the top right tab called handouts. And just a reminder to everyone, if you do want the presentation at the end, it will be available as a PDF to download. Like I said, it will be a very interactive session. So please do take part of the polls and talk amongst each other. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for today, Diana. Sharifah Diana is a skilled psychologist with extensive training in the field. She earned her BSc in psychology from the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, and completed a Master of Psychology from University of Science, Malaysia, and University of Pendidikan Sultan Idris. With a deep passion for raising awareness about mental health, Diana has gained valuable experience in a wide range of areas. Her expertise include conducting applied behavioral analysis for children, administrating intelligence personality tests, and neuropsychological tests, as well as providing therapy services. Right, over to you, Diana.
Hello. Good day, everyone. Thank you so much, Mikey, for the introduction and having me. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to be here with me to hopefully have a good session to talk about a really important and interesting topic that is pretty much common and relevant in all of our lives, which is basically how to navigate relationships. So essentially, we will be going through this is what we will be going through today, basically an introduction, as well as like what relationships are and the importance of it in our lives. And we will be going through some key communication skills that hopefully you can, take back from today as to be able to practice and use it in all your relationships. Which then we will then proceed to talk about setting boundaries in our relationships, as well as being advocates for a healthy relationship. Like, what does a healthy relationship look like? What are some green flags we want to look out for? Because a lot of the times we look out a lot on the red flags, and we sometimes might forget to think about the green flags as well. And essentially, we will have some time at the end to have a Q&A. But then also do know that throughout this entire webinar or this entire session, you definitely can drop your questions throughout, and I'll try my best to answer all your questions as best as I can. Okay, so let's begin. Before I share on to the next slide, I actually want to invite you to share what does a relationship mean to you. So if I could kindly get Mikey to, bring up the page for us so we can see what you guys share, what relationships mean to you, and we can have, a fun interactive discussion on this. Common interests and purpose. Oh, comfort and connection and network. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of your answers. Connection, love. We can see connection is definitely like a big one in the Mentimeter here. Interaction, love, and to be loved. Yeah. Support system. Love is another thing, right? To feel loved and to be loved. Connect. Relationship means to feel safe. Yeah. To encourage and grow together. Respect, acceptance. Yeah. Really, really lovely words. You can see that relationships definitely holds a pretty powerful thing in our lives, right? Connection, yep, I hear you. Communication. Okay. Thank you again, everyone, for sharing. If you don't mind, we can proceed on what we can share. Yep, understanding and respect. Thank you, Mikey, for bringing up the slide. We can move forward. Okay. Yes, again, thank you, everyone, for sharing. And definitely, I see a lot of pretty much similar answers that I would have expected. I again appreciate all your participation and interactiveness. So you're right, relationships are essentially just means connection, right? We're not talking about healthy or toxic relationships, we're just talking about relationships in general. And yeah, it really does mean connection, how we connect to people and how people connect to us, right? And how essentially we feel connected to people, and it's really, really actually a really important part in our lives, because we are essentially social creatures, so we thrive from feeling connected, which actually shows how, in fact, having good connection with people in our lives helps to improve or increase our mental well-being. It essentially helps to lower rates of anxiety and depression and sense of, chronic loneliness that we commonly feel. So loneliness is a sense of emotions. It's an emotion, it's a feeling that we feel. So it tells us that when we feel lonely, it reminds us that we are needing connection. We would need fulfilling connection. So yeah, essentially it does increase our mental well-being. Yep, in the end, you want to be connected with someone, you know. And thirdly, definitely it protects ourselves from suicidal tendencies. You know, this has been proven in research that for those who feel connected, whether in communities, whether in their families, their friends, you know, from in their groups they're in, either with like workplace or they're connected with their schools or, you know, hobbies and special interests. These research have actually shown that um, these factors actually protect people from suicidal tendencies. So which then again, you know, coincides to increase your mental well-being, right? You know, you feel connected, you feel supported, you feel loved, you feel accepted. Then, you know, it makes life, which goes to the fourth point, which makes life even more fulfilling. You know, which improves your quality of life, with which includes increasing, you know, your overall well-being and sense of satisfaction in, you know, how you essentially live. Yeah. And yeah, that's one someone said in the chat, alone and lonely are not the same. You're right. You know, being alone is essentially being by yourself, but feeling lonely is essentially, that's why people say you can be in a group of people, you can be in a crowd of people, and you can still feel lonely, right? So yeah, essentially loneliness is something that a lot of people with low mood or struggling with their mental well-being can actually impact their um, their sense of connection with people. So commonly with those who are struggling with depression, one of the things that there's one of the common red flags we notice is the sense of withdrawal from their communities or from their connections, despite that it being hopefully one of the things that can actually protect them. So yeah, thanks again for sharing that. I appreciate your contribution to the discussion. Okay, if you're okay to proceed, let's move forward to basically what makes basically a relationship, the elements of it. So these are the 6 common elements of a relationship, you know, that hopefully makes an effective one. So how would you know that the relationship that I'm in, and it doesn't matter whether it's romantic, it can be all types of relationship. It can be family, it can be friendship, it can be romantic, it can be professional, it can be, again, sense of community, even, and in communities it's so big, you know, you can connect with your specific gender groups, your specific hobby groups, as well as like your religious groups and so forth. So that gives you a sense of community and connection, a sense of belongingness, and a sense of identity towards who you are as a being. So yeah, essentially there's 6 elements of a relationship, which encompasses acceptance. So this means that the ability to accept strengths and limitations of the person. The second one is trust and honesty. This is commonly built with transparency, you know, being able to communicate openly, transparently, honestly, in a kind and respectful way, as well as, and with trust and honesty, it actually helps to build and affirm the person's ability, reliability in your life, essentially. And the third part is boundaries, you know, being able to respect and understand, you know, and communicate these boundaries to one another. And then the fourth one is responsibility. So essentially being able to take some accountability in how you know, behave, or how you might respond, or in your actions, essentially. So this is an example would be, this is commonly important when, because we have to understand that we're humans, we're not perfect. It's not necessary to avoid conflict or to avoid, we do try our best to avoid or to try to reduce harming others, or like, you know, accidentally hurting other people. But that also comes into play the importance of being responsible and accountable for our actions. and essentially being responsible in a relationship, taking an active role into how much you contribute or how much you want to contribute in a relationship or how much you want to invest in a relationship. So, and it's reciprocal. And then the fifth one is support. So essentially being able to feel supported, receive support, and give support. A lot of times, what I commonly hear in my practice is, oh, I help people a lot. I give a lot of support to others. But when it comes to me, I struggle to receive support. I struggle to receive some help. So that's part of, then can show that just because you can give support and just because you can show support doesn't, it also means that, again, reciprocal, mutual, that it goes for you, that you are also able to trust and receive the support. Okay. And lastly is essentially open communication. This is essentially to be clear and open to all parties so that essentially everyone feels heard and listened to. And without communication, open communication, all these, how do you communicate all of these other 5 elements? Essentially through communication. That's why it's such a big part of essentially in a relationship, right? So again, the last 2 points I wanted to mention was that it's mutual and reciprocal. So, but then it depends on the intensity and the capacity within the person. So being mindful that this whole, or I give 100, you have to give 100, might look different from time to time, depending on situations, depending on the person's ability, depending on your ability. And it does not necessarily mean that the commitment towards the relationship wavers, if that makes any sense. Yeah, thanks for sharing on the chat that it needs to be communicated on the expectation. Open communication can be hard if the other half is too sensitive. Okay, not everyone has the courage to have open communication. Communication is important, but not everyone can tolerate it. Thank you so much, because that's also one of the things I wanted to ask you guys to share. What are some of the issues commonly that you face, in a relationship? And I would like to also invite Mikey again to help us to share the page. Thank you. Yep, you're right. Accepting support does not mean we are weak. In fact, it means that we're really, really strong, because it's hard to accept help, isn't it? And it's in fact really resilient if you can. So yes, anyways, thank you, Mikey, for bringing this up. I would really want to encourage you guys to share what are some of the common issues that you face in your relationships. And it can be, again, anything: romantic, family, friendship, even with your bosses, your managers, or even with your team members, the people that you manage, right? Or your colleagues. It can be conflict management, trust. Okay, trust is a big one, right? Setting boundaries, communication, ineffective communication, too sensitive, trust, listening for the sake of listening but not willing to understand. Wow, that's a powerful one. Doubts, communication, trust issues. Yep. To grow together on the same path, conflict management, respect. Yeah, these are really, really great points. And a common one, trust. Yeah, trust is definitely important in a relationship, right? The ability to trust a person. It does take effort and it does take time. And it's not just from one way, it does take from both sides. Communication is oversharing can be an issue in relationship. Great question. It depends on, I guess, how the relationship is or how the other person is as well. And what I mean by that is in terms of the foundation of your relationship, if that makes any sense. But this whole concept of oversharing, it only depends on if the person thinks you're oversharing. You know, unless the person is like, there's no such thing as oversharing. For me, I love to know everything about you and learn all about you. It's like I said, it depends on the person that you're sharing with. Yeah, what Jonan said, if it's only one-sided, then yeah, perhaps. And again, depends on you if you feel safe to share with this person. And again, let's not have this connotation of such thing as oversharing, because again, it depends on what you want to learn. So if you feel like you want to learn about this person, then definitely it's acknowledging and it's accepted in your relationship, right? Passive aggressive communication, yes. Yeah. A common issue that we face, isn't it? When it's not confrontational and not direct. Anyways, yes, thank you so much, Mikey, and everyone for sharing the common issues that you normally face in your relationships. Let's go ahead and proceed on basically talking about communication. I think it's a big one today. So we think that communication is pretty simple. I mean, theoretically, it's pretty simple. It's just we listen and we talk, right? We all listen and we talk. But honestly, effective communication does take conscious effort and practice to get good at, and we have to be aware that communication it goes beyond than just verbal communication. It means like the words I say or the things I write or the things that I draw. So it's verbal, but it's also non-verbal, so non-verbal, it's, for example, like my facial expressions, like, when I make this kind of face, or when I change up my tone, or when I change up my volume of my voice, or even, for example, body language, when someone is speaking to you and they're not necessarily looking away, or they're crossing their arms, or they're hunching in. So these are all actually ways of communication. Whether or not we're aware of it, that's another point. So yeah, essentially, healthy communication requires both, the speaker and the listener to be effective. So it's one way to be an effective speaker. It's another way to be an effective listener, which we will cover both in a bit. But essentially, with both effective listener and speaker, then we're able to come together and have an effective relationship, because then we're able to have effective conversations and discussions. They are imperative for trust, they are imperative for acceptance, for support, for transparency, and all the elements of the relationship that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so essentially the importance of communication, of like being able to practice effective communication, is to build desire. You want the desire for your partner. What commonly happens is, if you don't feel like you can effectively have effective discussions and communication with your partner, the desire of wanting to be or to invest or commit into the relationship does reduce. So that's why it's important to have effective communication to protect the relationship, essentially. And again, secondly, is to build trust. Being able to address feelings of one and another, right? Essentially being able to talk to your partner. In this case, in this case, an example I'll give is romantic or even friendship or family, right? Being able to share the happy moments and the sad moments. And I know it's hard, especially to share the sad moments, because it's uncomfortable. It's we might feel a sense of like, I don't want to share this burden to this person, or I don't want to necessarily spread the negativity and all those things. But it's important also to know that that a relationship is essentially like a boat. a strong and effective relationship of a boat is sometimes there will be no waves. So that's those on the happy days, sunny days. And sometimes there will be waves, really, really strong waves. So it's not so much about, oh, the waves can't happen, but more of, oh, I know that whatever weather comes out, the boat will always be there, or the boat is there for me, feeling secure and feeling able to trust in a relationship, or in this case, the importance of it to communicate, right? And it obviously, with good communication and effective communication, it builds intimacy, you know, um, as you are able to be vulnerable, and completely honest with how you feel and what you think, it helps to build a sense of closeness. Again, it doesn't have to be in a romantic way. You can, even in a workplace setting, right? Being able to communicate your struggles to your manager, or to your team lead, or to your partner, or as in colleague or team member, right? When you're able to share these issues with them, you feel wow. And when they share it back to you, you're able to feel this sense of closeness, which then builds intimacy. So intimacy is not just for romantic situations, but all types of relationships, essentially. It's just that intimacy might look different for each type of relationship. So for more romantic ones, it might increase in physical intimacy or physical closeness. But perhaps for in a more professional workplace setting, it might be more towards um, a sense of trust in reaching out for help, or building new ideas, or working together, or sharing ways to help each other to be more effective. So that's essentially, and providing support. So that's essentially how communication is able to, build that sense of intimacy. How is intimacy different? How different is intimacy and vulnerability? Essentially, being vulnerable helps to build intimacy, if that makes any sense. So being vulnerable, or vulnerability, is a tool to build closeness and intimacy lah. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Okay, and the last one of importance of communication is essentially to build better conflict resolution. Sometimes we feel like not really, because it makes it worse. Probably it's not because of communication in general, but the way of the steps that we're taking in being either ineffective listeners or ineffective speakers, essentially communicators and expressors lah. So know that it's normal to fight. It's normal to disagree. It really is, like, again, we're not expected to be in sync all the time with everyone. That's really, really hard to find, and really, really hard to do, right? Because we're exposed to so many different things. We have our own lives and our own beliefs, and our own values. So expecting to be able to coincide every single thing with this person in your relationship is really, really hard. So it's not essentially, again, it's not about not having disagreements. Again, it's about how to improve the way we manage conflict, and that knowing that just because we have a disagreement, or just because we have conflict, doesn't mean there's no opportunity for repair. So that's important. Like relationships, in all types of relationships, there's always opportunity for repair. Okay. Yes, I'm just looking at the questions really quickly to see if I can answer anything now. If not, I will answer at the end of the session for today, right? So I hope you guys don't mind to wait until the end of the session. Again, thank you so much for all the questions. I really, really appreciate them. All right, so basically now we understand what are the importance of communication. Now let's get into how do we actually do it. So today I'll be sharing, I think, effectively about 5 key points, 5 key skills in effective communication. So the first one is to be mindful. So it sounds really simple, But again, it's not. It's a practice. It is a skill, especially when we're not so used to practicing it. But essentially, being mindful is being present in the moment. So that really does matter nowadays because of how our lifestyles and the way things are currently is very, very distracting. That we are constantly on the go, we're constantly thinking about something else, either something in the future to worry about, some things to do, something. There's always something to think about, right? So when we're having conversations with people, we might not be mindful, and even myself, I'm guilty of this. Sometimes when someone says something, you realize, what did this person just say? I'm really sorry. I did not get it. I didn't receive that at all. I heard you. I heard words, but I didn't reciprocate. I did not process. So that's why being mindful is really, really important. When people are talking to you, to try and minimize distractions, especially our gadgets, our phones, our laptops, especially if a person is sitting right in front of you trying to engage in a conversation, a pretty hard conversation sometimes. Try to be mindful of your nonverbal communication, of your openness to be there to listen. Okay, which then goes into the second one, which is active listening, right? Active listening is essentially a skill to become an effective listener, right? So it's essentially 6 steps. The first one is to pay attention, to be aware of what the person is saying, the nonverbal cues, to focus on the content of the person, what they're saying. Excuse me. And essentially, trying to use affirming statements such as "I heard you," or even just nodding, looking attentively instead of taking your phone and just be like, tell me more, what happened. So it's essentially communicating your whole sense of being, that you are present and that you are there. Eye contact is important. um, your body facing them is important. Your tone of language, your facial expressions when they say certain things, maybe you might be like might make a subtle way of judgment, which goes into the second point, which is to try to withhold judgment. Essentially, this is really, really important as an effective listener, but very easy to forget, okay? Because we have a tendency and we're really quick to make judgments. And judgments here might not just be just bad judgments, but also good judgments. So we might make assumptions of what people think or what people feel or what people believe, right? For example, a common one I can think of right now is when a person or your friend goes up to you and talks to you about their breakup, right? And they've shared with you all their pains and struggles of their breakup, all the negative things about their ex, and you're seeing them crying, you're seeing them sad, and we might have a tendency to either jump to the solution, to be like, just forget that person, it's not worth your time, she's not worth your time, and all these things, right? So again, we're jumping to conclusions, we're making judgment that this is what the person wants to hear, this is what the person needs to hear. That's another thing, needs to hear, right? We want to be mindful that we don't want to assume and make judgments of what the other person needs. We want to be able to clarify, we want to be able to hold the space, to be to and to be, that goes back to being mindful. Do you have the capacity to hold the space without judgment, right? Essentially, it can be really, really difficult because sometimes seeing that your loved ones in pain, you want to jump to quickly taking away the pain, right? In the way that we think we know, which is solutions that we think is the best for them. Again, making assumptions and making judgments of what we think is best for the person, which might not be actually what they need, So again, that goes back into reflecting on yourself and clarifying with them, essentially asking, I hear that this breakup is really hard for you. It pains me to see you like this. It's okay to share. That's sharing how you feel. It pains me to see you like this, but I still want to be here for you, in whatever way that you need me to. How do you need me to support you today? Is it to talk about solutions? Is it just to be here for you to cry? Is it just, what do you essentially think you need at the moment? And if they don't know the solution, it's okay. You can suggest and they can pick the suggestion. And sometimes again, being not taking your presence for granted, just being there as a listener is very, very effective, very, very powerful, and very, very important. Not necessarily jumping to giving them solutions or advice or suggestions so much, but just being there, like, yeah, this is really hard. Giving them a hug, holding that hand, just being there through the emotion. And that can be hard. So that's why going back to being mindful with yourself as well, checking in on yourself to see, do I have the capacity to do this? Am I in a space where this is a safe space for this person to share with me? Are we in a private space? Will we be interrupted? Do I have uninterrupted time, or do I actually have another thing I need to do in 15 minutes? So, it's essentially, that's how essentially it works in being an effective, active listener. So the last one is to summarize. Mainly this is another skill that you can use. Like, okay, I hear you're saying all these things about your ex and it's causing you a lot of pain. Am I hearing this right? Yeah, exactly. And why would you do that? Normally it goes like that. Like, why would you do that? For example. So it helps actually, not just with the person speaking, but for yourself to check with them. Are you listening in a curious manner without making judgment and assumptions? Okay. All right. So, yeah, thank you for listening and for all the questions. Yes, I'm just quickly looking through it. Okay, but yeah, and then I'm going to proceed to the third one, which is using I statements. So this is a skill for speaking, for expressing. Previously, we talked about more on the listening side. So this is more for how do I actually express and manage conflict. This is one of the tools that you can use for conflict management. So I statements is actually really, really helpful to communicate how you feel in a way that is respectful and kind, so that we don't trigger, or we try to avoid triggering the other person, the listener's defenses up. So for them to not necessarily feel so attacked. So I'll give you a common example of this. We can see I can feel frustrated. So essentially using I statements is just using the format I feel what, when, what, because, what, and what do you need? What I need is what. Okay, so it's effective because you're expressing yourself and you are explaining the behavior rather than penalizing the person. So, for example, I'm so upset because you're so lazy. You just don't listen to me. You're so awful. I hate it. Right? Instead of actually communicating effectively of what is it that's making you upset, instead of putting labels and harsh statements, saying, okay, I feel really frustrated, because, or like when you don't wash your dishes last night, even after I've reminded you so many times. Don't say so many times, try to be specific. So in this case, I reminded you twice. So, and then you can immediately provide solutions. So what I need for you to do is to please wash the dishes. When? You can be real more specific. I need you to do it now if you can, or immediately once you're free after this task, for example. So that's another example. And in a more intimate way, right? Using I statements is essentially saying, I feel sad, when you don't look at me when I'm talking to you. It makes me feel, like it makes me feel like I'm not being listened to. You're focusing a lot on yourself and how you feel rather than pointing fingers towards the other person. I feel like you're just not a good listener. You just don't listen to me. You're just not as kind as you used to be, and so forth. But actually, saying, when you do this, I feel this way, or I feel like this because your actions essentially makes me feel this way. So that's essentially what using I statements is for. It's to have effective conflict resolution or talking about difficult things without essentially trying to point the fingers to each other and saying, like, it's your problem. No, it's your problem. For example, it's your problem for not doing this. Maybe it's your problem because you're too sensitive, or maybe it's your problem because you're not like this. It's more of like, okay, the understanding that different people have different needs, the way they communicate, and the way they feel certain things or the way they perceive things might be different. So being, again, withholding judgment and trying to listen without essentially jumping to conclusions. So clarify. I'm hearing you saying that. I'm hearing you saying that I didn't do this, or I'm making you feel like this. What about that is so important to you? If you want to know more, for example. So that's um, essentially how you use I statements. I would actually ask you guys to share in the chat of how you would use I statements. Please do so, but at the same time, I will proceed for the sake of time. Okay, because I still have a couple of things to cover. Okay, and the last two skills for communication is asking open-ended questions. This is a great skill. It's relatively, again, to practice. It's once you get the hang of it, it's you pretty much can use it whenever and to wherever in whatever situation. So you can mainly saying, it's like, for example, when you're talking to someone, it's like, did you hear what I said? It's a yes or no, right? And you don't really get much information out of that. So instead of saying, did you hear what I said? You can say, how did you feel about what I just shared to you? Or tell me how you feel about what I just said. So that's inviting a more in-depth conversation to understand more rich information and details about the speaker and the listener. Okay. So that's how open-ended questions is. Instead of saying, ask yourself the question first, and if it's a yes or no, how do we rephrase it? You can use statements. You can use question words like what and how, essentially. Okay, those are the two words that you can use to build your open-ended question asking skills. Okay, and the last one is to validate your feelings. Not just your feelings, the other person's feelings, or feelings in general. Okay, so validating your feelings actually shows that you understand and that you feel how they feel. No, not feeling how they feel, that you see their point of view. And it's important to know that validating one's feelings is so important, especially in a relationship, because this is a way that you build trust, this is a way you build support, and this is a way you build intimacy and closeness. And basically communicating acceptance, connection, and a sense of belonging. That I hear what you say. That does sound really, really hard. This must be really hard. I can understand. Sometimes you don't understand. Really, I don't understand how you're feeling. I cannot imagine how it must be like. But I can see that it really, really hurts you. I can see that it matters to you. So these are ways for you to validate a person's feelings. And it's important again, because we can really honestly subtly invalidate each other by dismissing how they feel. You shouldn't feel so sad lah, it's no big deal. That's minimizing the issue. So again, withholding judgment and trying not to make assumptions. So this means that just because it's not a big matter to you doesn't mean it's not a matter for them. And in a relationship, ideally, whatever that is a matter for your partner is a matter to you. Same as whatever that's a matter to you is a matter to your partner, right? So being aware of ways that we might invalidate ourselves and even each other, right? By minimizing the issue or even forcing or trying to push aside the negative emotions. Oh, it'll just get better. Remember, just like we can just be grateful for this and this and this. Sometimes it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to sit in the sadness. It's okay to sit in the frustration. Know that it is not permanent. If you allow yourselves to feel the feelings and validate those feelings, it will pass. Rather than if you will actually try to suppress it, try to avoid it, try to ignore it, then it lingers and eventually it will come up in other ways. Okay, so yes, I hope that's pretty clear. And again, with validation, acknowledge if there's any discomfort in yourself. Acknowledge if there's any biases or uncomfortable feelings within yourself. Okay. All right. So I will proceed with the next one, which is actually talking about boundaries, which is really important because it complements communication. So essentially, boundaries is being able to define, what is acceptable behavior, what's a behavior that's okay for you, and what's something that you're willing to accept in a relationship. Again, all types of relationship, right? It helps to define our values and the things that we appreciate, the things that we want, and the things that we advocate for, right? And there are so many types of boundaries. There's physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, and mental boundaries and so forth. So we can mainly talk more about like actually how does boundaries benefit you. So essentially overall, it improves your mental health, emotional health, your relationships as it protects it, because it sets clear boundaries and expectations for others on how they should behave around you and how you want to behave around them, which then helps to decrease your stress because you're not constantly people pleasing, you're not constantly being in this whole state of not being sure about not being sure about how to behave in the relationships and so forth, which then as well as improve your self-care capabilities, gain respect, and being able to give respect to others and as well as yourself, and promotes autonomy and also prevents burnout in a relationship because you're not constantly giving everything that you have without having a sense of stop. Okay, so these are the common issues that people face when setting boundaries, or these are the beliefs that people have when setting boundaries. Like, I can't set boundaries because it's selfish, because I'm being told it's selfish, that I am telling myself is selfish, and that triggers feelings of guilt and shame. So when you say no, or when you say I don't want to do that, it's like, oh, can I really say that? So it makes me feel really, really selfish, right? And the second one, the common one is to setting boundaries feels like I'm just telling them what to do, or like I'm ordering them around, when in fact, no, it's actually you're telling people essentially how to be effective in your relationship with you, and as well as for yourself towards them, right? So essentially it's not ordering people around, it's more of protecting the relationship, which goes to the point of, does it actually hurt the relationship? No, it actually protects the relationship. It wants to protect the relationship. So effective boundaries actually um, helps to make sure that nobody is frustrated secretly or building a lot of resentment or a lot of secret anger again that might blow up later on. Okay, so again, it's not selfish. Again, it's to make sure that in order for you to constantly give, you need to make sure that you are also not over sacrificing yourself or self-sacrificing to a point that you lose yourself completely in a relationship. We want to be able to know that setting boundaries actually helps to protect your well-being and the other person's well-being, and again, the relationship all in all. And the last common issue with boundaries, or like the common myth, is that boundaries is one size fits all. Like, oh, this boundary is for everyone. It doesn't work that way because humans are complex. We're complex. Relationships are different and they're unique. So actually, it does differ from person to person in how it looks like. And again, being mindful of that it can change with person, with time, with however the relationship grows. Okay. So essentially, how can we set some boundaries, right? This, the main first part is to actually recognize and realize that you are worth the boundaries. So it's to address any sort of negative beliefs, any sort of negative thoughts, that might impair or impact your ability to set boundaries. And this can be hard if you're very critical of yourself, or if you're in a really critical relationship, right? If someone is have very high expectations of you, and if you also have high expectations on yourself and on the partner. So knowing that, starting with the mindset that you do deserve boundaries and boundaries are okay, and that it helps to protect you and the relationship and your partner, is the very first step on how to start with boundaries, right? And then secondly, acknowledge what types of boundaries do you need, and it, again, in what relationship. Again, it differs from person to person, from time to time. So essentially, being able to define what that looks like and how that looks like. And then basically that goes to the third point, recognizing what it is. And then fourthly is to communicate in a respectful manner. So again, is not to say, I don't want to be friends with you anymore, or I don't want to see your face ever again. It's not necessarily about that, but it's more of like, hey, I don't like the way you communicate to me in that way, or the way you speak to me. I would appreciate if you would. It's using I statements. I would appreciate, what I need is for you to not use cuss words at me, or for you not to yell at me. So that's essentially how you communicate. And again, there's no point here, but I would say the fifth point is to start somewhere. I know a lot of people say here, setting boundaries is hard. You're right, it is hard because it's scary, because we feel that we're going to lose the relationship, that we're going to lose the person. So I would say, and at the same time also, if you're not used to setting boundaries, it does take time and courage to get used to it, and practice as well. So what I would say, start somewhere. If your goal is to make sure nobody yells at you ever again, for example, perhaps we can start smaller. Start at wherever you are comfortable at, and that can look different for every person. But ask yourself, what am I willing to do at this moment? When setting a boundary that is uncomfortable, but still tolerable, essentially. So start from there and slowly build it up. Okay, that's how you essentially strive to practice by asserting boundaries lah. And again, celebrate your efforts. If you, for example, you're trying to not say yes every single time to an outing with your friend, maybe out of 10 times you said no once or twice. That's a great effort. That's starting from where you're comfortable at and building from there, essentially. Yeah. And again, being aware that boundaries look different from person to person. Okay. And hopefully, after you practice all these skills with communication and boundaries, setting boundaries, you're able to find some green flags in your relationship. So, again, some of the green flags is you can, express and discuss your emotions in an open and safe way without feeling that you need to withhold yourself. Again, sometimes we need to be aware of what are some blockers that we might face, and how can we rectify with them? How can we rectify those blockers with your partner in a way that is in a respectful way of communicating, right? And then essentially the second green flag is that you can communicate or have difficult discussions, because again, you're not avoiding hard topics, you're not avoiding painful emotions. You feel like, I can't talk about this, it will be uncomfortable. It'll probably be like, I'm dreading this conversation, but I feel like I need to do it, and I feel like I can feel safe enough to have this conversation. Okay. And lastly, not lastly, you're not afraid to apologize, and they're not afraid to apologize. They're basically your safe space. They validate your emotions, they respect your boundaries, and you essentially want to be a better version of yourself in this relationship. So essentially, those are some of the common green flags that you can notice from everything that we shared today, pinpointing to the moments of acceptance, trust, support, responsibility, open communication, and yeah, sense of loving and acceptance. Okay, so that would be essentially the entire topic for today, a summary for today, basically where we talked about relationships and how to navigate through them.
Thank you, Diana. Hello, everyone. I'm back. So now we are in the Q&A session of the presentation. I know that Diana has already addressed some of your questions during the session, but we do have a few that came in during registration that we'd like to address first. Do write your questions in the meantime in the chat box, and we can highlight it for after the registration questions. But if we don't get to your questions, please feel free to reach out to your Naluri coach on the app. They will be able to answer your questions as well. For those of you, I know it's lunchtime for those in Malaysia. So for those of you that want to hop off now, I will be making the presentation deck available to download. So it's there on the handout tab. And also, please do leave your feedback of how you think the webinar was. This pop-up will come out again, but for those that want to leave now, it's available here on your left of your screen. Thank you. Okay. So first question from the registration process.
Great question.
How do we avoid toxic
to be honest,
people at
you
work?
can't avoid because it is very common and it does happen. So it's more of how do you manage people that you find that are draining and labeled as toxic in your lives. So first things first is that mindset that you would need to grasp is accepting that you cannot avoid this kind of people and that it happens. And it's more of like focusing on what you can control to do on it. So you can address it, you can confront, you can set some boundaries. Especially, it can be really difficult if it's someone that you need to work closely with. So it can be really hard for those who have to work with really toxic people. So I would say focus on things that you can control and try to limit yourself if you find that it's affecting you a lot, in the sense of communicating or reaching out, or only engaging when it's absolutely necessary, and then focusing again, how do you do R&R, you rest and recover from, because being around toxic people can really drain you, right? So essentially, um, surrounding yourself with people who fill you up again and support you again. Okay, hope that answers.
So how would you identify that that person is toxic to you?
Yeah, that would
Like,
be the
would
red
that be
flag.
the
So it
red
will
flags
be
that you
kind of
mentioned
like the
earlier?
opposite of whatever the green flags were. So you don't feel safe with the person, you feel judged, you feel you constantly criticized. These are like the most subtle ones. Is probably more like you feel judged, and you feel not safe with these people, and the more obvious one is they're saying really nasty things to you, they're doing really nasty things to you, and they're not supportive and they're critical towards you lah. Yeah.
Great. Okay. A related question. I know you touched upon it earlier. How do we deal with passive aggressive behavior, which is what you answered earlier,
Yeah,
but specifically
it's
the
again
silent
also
treatment?
really really hard, and there are many ways of how you can manage this. It depends on your capacity and your desire. So what I mean by desire is to not force yourself to do things, in a way, to do things that you might not necessarily want to do, right? So if you feel like my capacity today is just this much, that's what I'm going to do. So again, checking in on yourself. But with silent treatment, it's hard because this person is basically stonewalling you and not talking to you, right? Um, it's kind of like, if you've already tried to confront, try to engage, and try to, and it depends. It really depends. It's like, is it a conflict that was caused, that you've hurt the person? How do you engage in repairing and apologizing and working on that? Or if it's from them as well, so it's navigating through your own thoughts and feelings, as well as trying your best, to repair and engage. But then again, also respecting that, okay, this is as much as I can go. And if this person is still not choosing to navigate, I'm open for communication. I'm here to talk. I want to talk, and I will be engaging. But I will be here when you're ready. Essentially, it's having that kind of approach and mindset towards it. But it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. This one is a bit philosophical. There won't be a straight answer for this, I'm assuming. So, when you first fall in love, how can you tell whether this person is the one? How do you know whether you're in love with this person or just in love with the state of being
Yeah,
in
great
love and the
question.
security coming from it?
As straightforward as it can get, you try to imagine this feeling, or this whatever you're feeling, or the future you're having with this person, or is this person's face replaceable or not, if that makes any sense. So it's like, am I loving this person because of this person? That means I want this person's characteristics and nuances, and the way they talk. Oh my god, it's so stupid, and all these kind of like memories you want to share with this specific person. Or is it more like, I love the feeling of the attention, I love feeling being in love and all these things. But if it's not this person, I'm okay, because it can be a completely different person. That's how you can tell the difference of how, whether it's love or whether it's actually the person.
Yeah, I guess it's an age-old question as well. Like, we will never get an actual answer because
Yeah,
it's
true.
directly related to what even is love, Like, is it just chemical reactions in our brain, or is it something that actually exists? Is it
Okay.
real? But
Yeah.
that'll be a whole nother debate. So
Okay,
let's
Ken.
start moving on to the live questions being asked today. Yeah. So Well, this is interesting. When you mentioned communication skills earlier in terms of relationship, could this be
Oh
relating to our
yeah,
love
there's the
languages as
common
well?
top 5 love languages, right? And specifically like with love, right? Yeah, it definitely can be in the way we communicate our love. So in it can be in actions, it can be in gifts, it can be in like quality time and so forth. So these are again some non-verbal ways of communication. So yeah, definitely one of the love languages as well.
Okay. Also related, um, which is more important in a relationship, compatibility or
Hmm.
chemistry? And what's the
It's kind of like
difference?
your philosophical question. Uh, what is love and all that, right? Yeah, it's like, is it love
Yeah.
just chemistry?
Yeah.
Um, I would say, to be honest, this is not. This is like from my own like personal thoughts about it. It's, I think, a combination of both. But if you completely rely on chemistry, then it's quite unreliable because it's a feeling, if that makes any sense. I think being in a relationship is more than just a feeling. It's the same as motivation. If you want to rely on being an effective worker, it's just like, oh, I just need to be motivated all the time. It's not reliable because it's a feeling that does inflate and deflate, right? So what are the other things that makes it more reliable? It's like discipline or having a habit or routines, having a support system. So these are things that are pretty more concrete and consistent for you to maintain your motivation in work. And it's the same in relationships. What are some things um, that makes it a bit more concrete rather than just chemistry? It's like compatibility, feeling. And compatibility doesn't necessarily mean liking everything each other likes, but it's more of like being curious with whatever the person likes and wanting to explore things together, being committed to each other. And how do you show commitment, how do you show loyalty? That's something that you guys value in a relationship, right? And yeah, it's like saying, am I like deeply in love with my partner every single day? Is that a realistic expectation on ourselves? But am I wanting to spend a significant amount of my time in my life with this person? Then yeah, but does it solely rely on just love? It does fluctuate, but acknowledging moments that you can build on these feelings, because love is not just the butterflies. It can be like, oh, like I really want to go to this person when I'm really sad, or have these tough conversations, or ask their opinion, or have their thoughts on this, or because it's not just the chemistry, but also, yeah, the compatibility.
And I think it's also important to have, like, part of compatibility is
Yeah,
also being able to disagree with each other, but with mutual respect, like you mentioned earlier. So being able to agree to disagree without
better.
it becoming a problem. Okay. Another question. I'm sure some of us have had this in a relationship before, even with a partner or sorry, a love interest or a friend. But the question says, I'm quite a sensitive person. I cry a lot. When my partner feels attacked by me, I cry in front of him whenever we discuss a serious topic. It's not my intention. It's just in my nature. Is this something I have to overcome,
It's
or
a natural
is this a
reaction.
natural
I mean,
reaction?
obviously, there are more things behind it in terms of like what makes the tears come out more. Because sometimes, like for example, anger or feeling unsafe, the crying is a way for us to communicate to the environment that, oh, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling not safe at the moment. I'm feeling attacked at the moment, right? So it's if that is what happens, it's completely natural to you, right? Again, it differs from person to person depending on their childhood, depending on how they grew up and how they regulate their emotions and the things that they've been through and so forth, right? um essentially know that just because you cry in a conflict doesn't mean you're not an effective communicator. You still can communicate. You can cry, take your moment to cry, and then once you've let the tears out, you don't judge yourself, you don't shame yourself, so the tears actually flow out more naturally and more openly, and in a way that's not suppressed. Then you're able to then have the articulate your thoughts in a more organized way to communicate in a more effective way. So yeah, that's essentially to remind ourselves it's not necessarily an issue, it's just a way that you communicate things. There's a way of your body regulating your emotions and expressing those emotions, right? And it differs from person to person. Yeah.
Okay, we have a few questions kind of related to this, the emotional state. So obviously when you're trying to build a relationship, you need communication, but there are people that carry trauma with them, maybe from a
Yeah.
previous relationship with a partner or even their parents. And when they bring it into their new relationship with you, how do you have any advice on how to approach this? Obviously, you can't just get rid of the trauma, but it's a process
Yeah.
that needs to be worked on. Do you have
I
any
would
tips
say
for
first
this?
things first, to be aware of it. Like awareness goes a long way. So what I mean by aware is knowing your triggers, knowing what in your new relationship can be triggered by your old relationship or by your trauma, right? Being aware of that. How does that look like in you? Is it behaviors, thoughts, feelings, actions? How does that look like? So having awareness is really, really important. Um, and secondly, communicating this to your partner, in the spirit of open and effective communication. So communicating how this is something that you're going through and this is something that you're dealing with, right? And it's not an overnight fix and it does take time. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you want to wait until you're like completely healed for you to not be to only then go into a relationship. I mean, and actually going to healthy relationships helps for you to heal from traumatic ones, because how would you learn what a healthy relationship is without being in one, right? So I would say first, to be aware, secondly, to communicate, and third, to address the thoughts that comes out from the trauma. If it's anxiety, if it's um, negative thoughts, feeling low, distrust, and all those things, to really manage that either through therapy, through thought challenging, through affirmations, reminding yourself, okay, this is, because that's where awareness comes in, because you would know, okay, this is a reaction from my trauma. It's coming up because I was going through this really terrible thing, and my body is, or my mind is essentially trying to protect me now. So it might be its senses might be a little bit more sensitive towards whatever, or overinflated sometimes, right? So it's not necessarily effective or helpful. So what I can do is to be aware of this and try to manage, and work on my breathing if I need to, and remind myself and lean in for your partner's support. That's the whole point of having a partner. Get the support. I'm feeling insecure. I need some assurance. I'm really scared about this. Can you give me some assurance? Can you help me navigate through this? Yes. Yeah, that's how I would say.
Okay. I'm wary of time right now, so I think I'll just bring up one more question. I'm really sorry if we haven't managed to get to your question, but do remember, if you want to get your questions answered, you can reach out to your mental health coach on the Naluri app, or even if you want to ask it from Diana directly, you can always email her as well. She'll be available. Okay, so last question. I think it's quite a nice question to end on. Is it true we need to be comfortable being alone, like truly comfortable, before we are able to be comfortable in a relationship with someone else?
Again, it's kind of like the similar sentiment of like being completely healed before I go into a relationship. Being mindful that it's a great thing to actually strive towards, to be comfortable with yourself, to be comfortable being alone, because essentially being alone is being able to spend time with yourself. And it's a reflection more of like, do I accept myself? Do I like the parts of me, or am I actually really, really insecure and I don't actually really like myself and I criticize myself a lot, and I'm relying on relationships to give me that external validation that I'm not getting internally, right? So that's essentially, I guess, the whole sentiment of this whole thing of being alone is trying to strive for, is actually working on a relationship with yourself. Am I comfortable with who I am? Do I allow myself to grow? Do I have any unhelpful beliefs that are limiting me? Do I want to know myself? Do I know myself? For example, and it's again a philosophical question: do we really know ourselves? And it's again not an overnight thing, and it's not a period answer. It's ever changing. I think that's important to know. So it would contribute for you to enjoy loneliness. Not sorry, loneliness. Enjoy your time being alone. But again, it can go the other way. Some people who enjoy their alone time so much actually might struggle being in a relationship, because what is this person in my life? What is this? I had all this space. Suddenly it's being filled by this other person. It can feel very, overwhelming sometimes, right? So it's being aware that we're not taking things too extreme. Like, I need to be super duper okay with being alone and only then in a relationship, or I don't need to be alone at all and then being in a relationship. It's navigating through both. That, yeah, sometimes I can be alone, I can enjoy my own company, and at the same time also enjoy the company of others, enjoy the company of my partner. And I can be alone, but I choose to experience life and all these fun things in life and sadness and grievances with a partner. Either or. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you everyone for your questions. Again, really sorry we couldn't cover them all. Just before we wrap up, would you like to have any final words or
yeah, sure. I
summary
just want to say thank you again
presentation?
for being here today. I apologize if I couldn't address every single question, and I appreciate everyone's participation in very active discussion on relationships. I can see everyone going back and forth, providing that support to each other. And again, I hope that it benefits you and that you can feel supported amongst the community here that we've created, right? So that, yeah, know that you're not alone, and that you've got this. That's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Just before we close this room, please do remember to fill up the feedback form just on the bottom left of your screen. Tell us what you think of Diana, her presentation, and maybe what you think of me as well. Tell us what you enjoyed about this presentation, what we can do to improve it in the future. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends and family. Everyone that's joined will get a recording. But if you want to join future ones, please do go on your Naluri community website and you can see future webinars. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next webinar, everyone. Bye.